Kojo. Kojo, Kojo. Kojo, Kojo.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be interacting with Professor Salvatore. And his Twitter feed, I don't know if you've been following him over the last week, even before that. It's an absolute wonderful thing to be looking at his tweets, the videos that he's putting. He's almost on a Nehruvian discovery of India, if not a Bharat Jodo Yatra. And but I suppose you can see the similarities with Jawaharlal Nehru. But I hope he's restricted all those similarities to just the cap. You don't know any Mountbattens, do you?
I thought you were a nationalist.
I'm going to throw open the floor to a lot of audience questions very quickly because
you haven't prepared the session.
because he seems to be a wonderful person, and he's riled up the chauthi fails and commies and urban naxals, you know. So the enemy of an enemy is a friend. So I'm not going to grill him that much.
I have to be clear. I'm not an enemy of anybody. I've never used any of those words you just mentioned.
Like your sense of humor.
I have never used any of those words, and I won't.
Absolutely.
Urban naxals, please come towards the stage. I'd love to meet you, and I'm happy to hug every one of you.
Maybe once you start your party, you can invite a lot of urban naxals to vote for you. So let's get down to serious business. The debate is about democracy and the rankings, decoding the rankings. And let me begin straight off by saying that these rankings are absolute rubbish. Only fools and jackfruits and copper-plated jackasses would believe in them. They are as much believable as you would say that Taliban work for women empowerment, or Hafiz Saeed was an apostle for peace and non-violence. But the fact is, now that we've got this thing out of the way, we as logical and rational people, and not
of course
demented commies, have to talk about democracy, and in a very serious way, because it's not that everything is right. I mean, by which I mean not that everything is correct in our country and in democracies. So let's have the next 10, 15 odd minutes discussing about what is right and what is wrong. Not about the rankings, because both of us don't believe in those rankings. But to begin with, I'd like you, Professor, to set the frame up, and then I'll come and talk about what I believe should be the frame. So to begin with, two questions. One, what, in your opinion, is democracy? And number two, why do you, very briefly, believe that these rankings are not worth the paper they're written on?
The American humorist and journalist H.L. Mencken said a little over 100 years ago, said that democracy is the theory that the people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard. Now, he was no fan of democracy. He was saying that democracy is getting the worst of what you want and what you vote for. But in a way, that's a reasonable definition. It's not for us as commentators, as intellectuals, as university professors, to decide whether or not the voters have made the right decision. In a democracy, the voters are sovereign. Democracy means being able to look your leader in the eye and say, "You're fired." And if you have that authority, then you live in a democracy.
Right. So you believe India is a democracy?
India?
Yeah.
Of course India is a democracy. That's a
silly
question. Look, even for the Varieties of Democracy Institute, the question is not, is India a democracy? The question is, what is the quality of India's democracy? Yeah. And that's where all of the rankings and the criticisms come in. It's very difficult to criticize India as an electoral democracy. The question is always, does it have all of the larger requisites, the broader requisites that are necessary in order to ensure the proper functioning of a quality democracy? That's where the qualitative analyses, where the subjective analyses can be used to undermine the objective fact that if you look for a country that has 3 or 4 decades history of free and fair elections with routine transfer of power between parties, you can't find a single one under $10,000 or $20,000 GDP per capita except India.
Right. And the other question of why do you very briefly believe that these so-called democracy rankings are deeply flawed?
Each of the democracy rankings has serious problems. I'll have a paper coming out next week on March 1st about the Varieties of Democracy Institute rankings. It has very serious methodological problems in the way it's been constructed. So, for example, it has a subindex called Free and Fair Elections. On that subindex, there are 8 measures of free and fair elections. On those 8 measures collectively, Hong Kong scores 20 places higher than India for free and fair elections. Now, that's easy to point out and say that's ridiculous. Of course, we can't take this seriously. But from a social science standpoint, it's important to look at the methodological reasons why. So the questionnaire asks, does the country have violence at elections? Well, in Hong Kong, there's no violence at elections because it's a one-party police state. Is there any vote buying? Well, in Hong Kong, there's no vote buying. There's only one party you can vote for. Does the Electoral Commission have full authority to manage the election? Well, in Hong Kong, it's perfect authority, absolute authority over a single-party system. Okay. And the examples go on like that.
Right.
So the problems are deeply embedded in the methodology of the rankings, not in any ill will towards India, and I always want to emphasize that. But there are serious methodological flaws in the rankings when you can find that a one-party dictatorship actually has freer and fairer elections than India because the way you've set up the metrics predetermines that conclusion. Nowhere do they ask, is there actual competition in the election?
Right.
That's
So
not one of
let's-
the metrics.
Sure. I mean, I got what you said. Let's kind of play around with this theme a little bit. Let's raise the bar a little rather than comparing us to Hong Kong. Both of us actually believe that these democracy rankings that come out from the Nordic countries or the West are deeply flawed when it comes to India.
No,
But,
they're deeply flawed.
That's what I said. Yeah.
Not when it comes to India.
Oh, per se. All right.
They're deeply
Sure.
flawed. They have serious methodological shortcomings
Right.
where they
So
fail
if-
to measure actual competition in the real world.
Sure.
Is it possible to unseat the party in power?
Right.
That
So,
should be the number one question of a democracy rank. But 30 seconds. This is important.
All right.
30 seconds. They
As
don't-
long as you pay me 10 rupees for using that phrase.
They don't actually ask, is the election competitive? So a country that has the election won 95-5 can get the same ranking as one where it's 51-49. That's what first use.
I don't know if you've seen the OTT Fuzzy, but I need to make sure.
Yes, yeah.
Especially because you're wearing that cap, you might be. Legit, thank you. No, but if we were to say a perfect democracy is 10, let's say, ranking, where would you fit India, be honest?
I can't tell you India's ranking as a democracy. Of course, Indian democracy has challenges. Every democracy does. In my own experience, in research I've been doing the past 3 to 5 years, most of the challenges facing Indian democracy are challenges of poverty. And they're challenges of history, not challenges of actual
That's such an answer that a
democracy.
politician would give. I
But
mean,
they
honestly,
are.
he's already formed his party.
You
And his party symbol is Mysore Pak. No, but you mean to say you haven't really thought about, on a scale of 10, how much would you
No,
guess?
I can't tell you.
I would say 5. You don't have an answer to
you're
that?
lowballing India. I think you're lowballing India. Look, everything in the world
Right.
depends
So I'm
on
lowballing,
GDP
so
per
now I'm going to
capita.
put you on the thing. So you think it's 7?
I
If
think
5 is
that-
lowballing,
let me benchmark it instead to what kind of countries
Australia.
have
Why don't you
similar
benchmark
democracies.
Australia on 10?
I don't think India has quite the same quality of democracy when it comes to its organizational operation as Australia does.
Right.
Okay. In Australia, polling is essentially flawless. There are no issues with electoral registers. There are no problems with candidate symbols.
Same is the case with India as well.
But there are no problems. There are no objections. Everything just runs smoothly. Now, does that make Australia a better democracy? I'm not sure, because those are the conventional measures of democracy. A better measure of democracy is, can people get the policies they want?
Yeah.
In Australia, the answer is typically no. In Australia, the political establishment has one basically agreed set of policies, and no matter who you vote for, you're not really going to change that consensus. In India, by contrast, that's what I said at the beginning, democracy is the theory that people know what they want and deserve to get it.
Right.
Whether
So-
it's good for them or not.
Excellent. Before we move further, let me put my frame.
So I might say India
Yeah.
actually has a higher quality democracy than Australia. If by democracy we mean, do elections have consequences?
Yeah.
Can the people get what they want? And can the people fire their leaders?
Right.
And in India, the clear answer to both of those at the national level and at the state level is yes and yes.
Yeah, excellent. So this is how I put my frame. I think India is a democracy. I would, on a scale of 10, I would give it 5. But I also believe that India is a banana republic. Now let me qualify that. And I say this from 3 points of view. Number one, in no other country is the majority population so actively discriminated against constitutionally and legally. Now, that can only happen in a banana republic. Here is how, Professor, I describe democracy, much along the lines of how you have. But essentially, in order to grade democracy, you look at two great institutions of democracy. One is you would look at the way elections happen in any country, so election commission. And the other is the judiciary. Because judiciary, according to me, should be above politicians and the whole political process, legislature, and of course it isn't. But the fact is Supreme Court. So essentially, if you look at the two most important indicators of democracy, the Supreme Court of India and the Election Commission, I would say by and large, barring a few faults that are traditional or they crop up every now and then, they are independent. Election Commission is independent and the Supreme Court is independent. It is, you have a lot of cases where I'll come to why I call this country a banana republic. And I talked about just one issue yesterday, which is that you had the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the majority population in Kashmir 30 years ago. And 700,000 people are displaced. In no other large economy you would find the majority population being refugees in their own country. But India is that case where Kashmiri Hindus have been discriminated against. Not only that, the Supreme Court refuses to open cases of persecution of Kashmiri Hindus, saying, quote, too much time has elapsed. Now, is that democracy?
But
And-
Anand, I have to disagree with you on each of these points. Democracy is, can you vote for things and get them done? Now, liberal internationalists want to accrue to that definition of democracy all of their own personal pet politics, their own personal pet projects. It strikes me that you're doing the same. You just have a different set of pet peeves from what liberal internationalists have. A democracy means, can you vote and get what you want? The people voted to abrogate Article 370, and you got an abrogation of Article 370. The plight of the Pandits will be taken up when the people of India want to take up the plight of the Pandits. And until that becomes a major election issue in India, it's not going to be a major issue for the parties, because India is a democracy. When it comes to independence of institutions, no, I'm sorry. In America, courts are highly politicized. We elect our judges. No collegium system. We elect our judges in many states in the United States.
So what you're saying, I'm just extending
we're
the
a
definition of,
democracy.
so I mean, if you were to restrict the definition of democracy as just electoral, then what you're saying, of course, makes sense. But as I
Electoral
said,
and everything needed to
the Election
support it.
Commission is independent. And, elections happen in this country fairly independently throughout the length and breadth of this country, state elections and central elections. But what I'm talking about is you keep on broadening the definition of democracy, and here I will include more and more things. But I just gave you one example where the Supreme Court of India doesn't want to reopen cases of murder, rape,
That's-
genocide, because it feels too much time has elapsed. Now,
that
in
may
any
be
democracy,
a bad thing. I
that's
don't
what I
know.
mean.
But you can't say that every bad policy means there's no democracy.
Yeah.
Democracy means elections. It means having the necessary freedoms to support a meaningful choice. Freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to contest elections. If you have those basic freedoms, you have a democracy. Now, if you say my democracy produces policies I don't like,
so
I'm
freedom
sorry.
let's come to freedom of speech, for example.
freedom of speech.
So in India, we don't have essentially freedom of speech because it is subject to something. That's why I say it's a banana republic, and there are so many examples. Not just the center or the Modi government not exercising or giving freedom of speech, but state governments as well. I mean, there was a case 2 weeks ago where a chemistry professor from Jadavpur University had passed on or shared through an email a cartoon of Mamata Banerjee. He was arrested on that day. It took him 11 years to be acquitted by the court.
And
Now, those are the
these-
people who actually are tweeting democracy rankings when it comes and saying India is no longer democratic.
And these
Mamata
are problems
Banerjee.
of poverty. These are problems of living in a country where there is a history of communal violence. Of course, India has narrower limits on what is allowable speech because India, just to be frank, has a history of people killing each other over these things
So
that
you're
we don't
cushioning-
have in Australia, that we
you
don't
are-
have in the United States.
That's a bit patronizing.
I'm
I mean,
sorry,
you
but it's
saying,
true.
You saying that Indians don't deserve the extent of freedom of speech that Australia does.
I'm saying Indians, through their institutions, I think have made a sensible and reasonable decision to put limits on freedom of speech that we don't accept in the United States.
Right. So
now,
according to you,
now the question
let me
is-
finish. Let me finish.
look,
It's
30
heating
sec-
up,
10
which is
seconds,
good.
10 seconds.
10 seconds, all right.
Give me the-
He is really going to be a politician.
All right.
There we go.
Freedom
Yeah.
of speech is limited, sure.
Yeah, so as I'm saying, talk to the person who's arrested and who was acquitted after 11 years. His life has been ruined. Are you
course.
telling me that being an Indian, he needed less of freedom of speech than an Australian or an American? Now, let me give you another example. I completely condemn what happened to Pawan Khera. You had a huge police presence. He made a terrible comment against the Prime Minister. He kind of made, even though some may say that it was a jocular comment, the middle name being Gautam Das instead of his Prime Minister's father's name. And the next thing you know, you have like 100 cops on the tarmac preventing him from going because someone filed an FIR in Assam, Guwahati. All those people, and I condemn that. But the funny thing is, all those people who were condemning it, saying it is the coming of the emergency, were actually celebrating when the Punjab police had whisked Tejinder Bagga away, who's a politician from the BJP, just because he said, he used a word that Mahua Moitra used in the parliament. So, I mean, I can use parliamentary language now. He said, 100 harami marenge tab ek Kejriwal paida hoga. Now, I don't know if that's correct or not, but the fact of, no, it's not. No, don't quote me on that. The fact of the matter is that a case was registered in Punjab for what he said. And the Punjab police came and actually took him from his home. He was en route to God knows what would have happened to him, tortured in Punjab. Haryana police came in and kind of freed him. The fact of the matter is all those people who were crying the death of democracy when Pawan Khera was being arrested were celebrating the arrest of Tejinder Bagga.
I can give you another example.
So many of those.
When Article 370 was abrogated, India turned off the internet in Srinagar.
Right.
Widely criticized around the world as a restriction on freedom of speech. What did Dr. Jaishankar said?
Yeah.
He said, we accept some restrictions in order to save many lives.
The problem
Now,
is it's relative. It's subjective.
I'm an American. I come from a liberal democracy where freedom of speech is absolutely fundamental, where if you want to wave a Nazi flag in front of a Jewish synagogue, you can do that. It's your basic right as an American. We have that culture. If Indians, and it's up to you, if Indians have decided that your political speech has to be more civil.
No, I'm putting you on the
As
spot. It's not
long-
up to us. I'm saying, is this decision better than what our state has decided?
I'm not going to say one is better than worse.
Come
I'm going
on.
to say one is what Americans want.
You being so
I am-
political.
I am not going to criticize Indian democracy for making decisions that Indians believe are sensible as long
Well, I am,
as long no, you can criticize it as a policy.
Of course, yeah. I can criticize
doesn't
American
limit-
democracy and I can criticize Indian
But
democracy.
it doesn't limit democracy.
Now,
It doesn't limit democracy.
The reason
as
why I
long-
believe it's a banana
finish-
republic-
I'll finish sense. It doesn't limit democracy.
I need 10 more.
It doesn't
10
limit
more.
democracy as long as it doesn't prevent the full expression of political thought in campaigns. If you can still campaign for office,
That's just so subjective. That's
Oh, no.
almost draconian.
if you say
Because and patronizing. And
No,
I
no,
take
no,
serious
no.
offense to that as an Indian.
let's use
You are saying in
words-
America and Australia, we have unfettered freedom of speech and expression. But you guys, this is suited for you.
That
So
does not-
you should not do this. You should
that
not
is
do
not,
that. Yes.
That is not what makes India a democracy
So,
or not.
in a sense-
America is not a democracy because of freedom of speech. America is a
I'm
democracy
saying
because it's elections.
you just said one of the elements of what defines a democracy is freedom of speech. You just said
Sufficient
it.
speech to conduct
Right.
political campaigns is
So
what's necessary
in that
for
extent, you would rate
democracy.
America higher than India.
No, no, no. I would rate India freer. I'm sorry, America freer than India.
There we go.
Freer than India, yes.
Freer is not better.
I'm free
Higher.
to
Freer is not
own-
higher on the index.
I'm free to own and carry a gun in America. That's a
Yes.
basic civil right in America, is if I want to own a firearm, I can own a firearm, and if I want to carry it, I can carry it. Now, that's not a basic freedom in India. It's a basic freedom in America. America is freer than India.
There is
But
basic
that
freedom in India to
doesn't
carry
make it-
firearms. There
that
is.
doesn't make it more of a democracy.
Haven't you attended any marriages in Bihar? No, but let me define again, because maybe I wasn't very clear.
Yeah.
Why we are a banana republic. Here, Hindus are prevented from legally going to the court in demanding their temples back, temples that have been destroyed and mosques built over it, through an act of parliament.
Through an act of your parliament
Now-
that your parliament can reverse, and your parliament has
Is
chosen not to reverse it.
exactly, exactly.
That's
This
a
is a
democratic
place where
decision
for a
made by
year,
India.
for a year, you can blockade highways, 5 highways that connects Delhi, the capital of India.
Sure.
You can blockade them for a year, and still the Supreme Court says we are not going to remove those blockades. Is this not a banana republic? When you talk of press freedom.
Sure.
Now, in Chhattisgarh, a journalist complained of power cuts. He was charged with sedition. You had Kunakanam nuclear power plant activists. In one day, 8,000 of them were arrested under charges of sedition by the Congress. The BJP has done the same. I mean, in Gujarat, an editor, Mr. Patel, Dhaval Patel, not the Dhaval Patel I know of, the BJP person, but he criticized the COVID handling of the Gujarat chief minister. He was charged with sedition and arrested for 15 days.
When do the questions come?
So it's a freewheeling discussion. I mean,
Oh, okay, thank you.
I gauge the quality of your answers, so I'm not going to ask you many more questions. No, just joking. The point of the matter is,
The point is
the
India
rankings,
may
the
be a
rankings
banana
may be whatever
republic.
they may be, whoever is coming up
That's
with
up
those
to you.
rankings there. But we have to
But it's
define
still a democracy.
a better place to live in for Indians, for Americans, for Australians. And I'm afraid, Professor, you want to make Australia and America a better place for Australians and Americans to live in. But we are just friends, so please don't take it in a very antagonistic way. But I'm just saying, we deserve much better. We deserve much better on a lot of fronts.
And you may.
Let me talk about the other
Oh,
thing.
but
We talk
let
of
me-
majoritarianism for Article 370. For 70 years.
Give me my 30 seconds. Take a break. What? Okay.
Give me 10 rupees
Give-
more.
give me-
You can't.
Give me my 30 seconds. Take a break from the monologue. Look, everything you're saying may be true.
Yeah.
Don't convince me. Convince them. Convince the voters.
Yes.
India is a democracy. If it has policies that you don't like, you can change them. That's what the heart of a democracy is. You can't say, I don't like this policy, so India is not a democracy. The protesters are blocking the streets, so India is not a democracy. The farmers are not getting
You're
their
taking
money,
the
so India
easy
is
way
not a
out. You
democracy.
just now talked
A
about freedom
journalist
of
was-
speech.
A journalist
You said
was
it's part
beat
of
up.
democracy.
A journalist was beat up in some town. India is not a democracy.
No, Professor,
That's not
constitutionally,
the question.
constitutionally, we have been restrained. We've been shackled. constitutionally. And if this government were to change the constitution, people would say this is the death of democracy. I mean, irony. This government would like to remove, or if it likes to remove, or if it wants to remove the shackles from the constitution that are misguiding us into believing we are a democracy, people will accuse of Modi of actually being a dictator, trying to remove things from the constitution that ought to be removed.
Look, there are two
now that is the
serious
hallmark
problems.
of democracy.
There are two serious problems with Indian democracy. Would you like to hear them?
Yes, very quickly, because you just given me a tenor. I mean, I won't.
There are two serious problems with Indian democracy. One you've already gotten to, which is the extraordinary reach of the Supreme Court. The idea that the Supreme Court can appoint its own future members through the collegium system, and that it can set aside lawfully enacted constitutional amendments through the basic structure doctrine, that is unprecedented in the world. And I think that you really have to see, it may be a good thing. I can't tell you whether it's good or bad for the Supreme Court to have such powers. I can tell you that it is undemocratic for the Supreme Court to have such powers. What would be more democratic is for the Supreme Court to be beholden to the electorate, either directly or indirectly via your elected representatives. That's the first problem.
So now you're grading
Second,
democracy, right?
Oh, because
you're grading it.
I'm saying that is not
First it was freedom of
democratic.
speech,
But
then
I'm
it was
being clear.
collegium system, which is logical.
No,
I'm
it's
agreeing with
not
you.
democratic because you can't
So,
vote on it.
Now,
Okay. The second thing that's not democratic, so there are two major problems. The second is the lack of reapportionment in India's Lok Sabha since 1971. That lack of reapportionment is profoundly undemocratic. Democracy means one person, one vote. And India no longer has that systematically. People who are poorer, people who are more Muslim in the north of India tend to have fewer votes than people in the south of India. That may be appropriate, you may think it's a good policy, but it's certainly not democratic.
so
Now, what
people
I
who are
find
more
troubling,
what? People who are more up north?
the entire north of India is underrepresented in the Lok Sabha because of the freezing of reapportionment since 1971. Now, those are two things that are undemocratic. Now, what I find troubling, as someone who studies democracy, is that not a single one of the international democracy rankings cites these two clear transgressions of international democratic norms when they criticize Indian democracy.
Not just that.
Because they agree with these policies.
Yeah,
they refuse
the other
to
thing,
condemn
if
them.
you were to read some of the democracy rankings and the reports, they say before 2014, rarely, if ever, the governments were draconian in stifling freedom. So they completely ignore the 8,000 charges of sedition on activists and so many other things, stifling of press freedom and all that. So obviously, we're not discussing that. Incidentally, so I'm not in much disagreement with the professor and his views, except on a very lighter vein, who he calls as his guru and mentor. I don't know whether you know. The guru, as Professor calls him, was responsible for the quote-unquote coup story. And the mentor was the guy who punched someone in New York. These are the journalists who, for the professor, are...
Oh, there are
it's
three.
like... It's okay. It's,
You're leaving them out.
Now,
I have
my
learned to
condemnation.
we have to tell people
no.
who
Let me
the
finish.
mentors are.
You can't interrupt me, as yet. You're not an anchor. So my condemning words will not do justice to the preposterousness of him choosing those two as his gurus and mentors. So I have to play something that will be sufficiently provide the outrage. There. Did you see that shriek? That shriek signifies our outrage at who you've chosen as your guru and mentor.
Look,
These are the people.
there are...
Now they say, now one second, they say
ahead.
journalism is the second oldest profession. These two people, journalists you've chosen as your guru and mentor, have made it the world's oldest profession.
There are three people I've learned more from.
It is, now when you
want to
say
hear
that
the
people
answer or
must,
not?
now one second, no,
All right.
one second. You need to explain how on earth are you choosing such people who are responsible for spreading the most vicious lies and propaganda and fake news and setting false narratives over the last 2 decades as your gurus and mentors? Explain,
Would you like an answer?
please.
All right. There are 3 people who've taught me more than anybody else about Indian democracy. Shekhar Gupta, absolutely number 1. Rajdeep Sardesai, number 2.
I just proved my point.
You wanted to hear Karan Thapar, number 3. Now,
It goes from bad to worse. My God.
If you like what I've been writing about Indian democracy for the past 6 months, you have to credit them. Because I didn't learn it from Anand. I am now watching Anand on YouTube.
Quite unfortunate, but
I'm starting to pick
the
up.
fact of the matter is,
I'll
let
read
us
his
take a
chemistry books.
You wanted democracy, vox populi.
But-
Let's take a vote.
But if-
How many of you think
yeah,
that
please.
his 3 gurus are worthy of being called gurus? Sorry, let me rephrase that. How many of you think that Professor's 3 gurus, Shekhar Gupta, Rajdeep Sardesai, and Karan Thapar, are not worthy of being called gurus? Raise your hands.
All right. Second vote.
Democracy
Quiet,
is alive.
Quiet. Second vote.
I think let's end
Second
there
vote.
and let's throw the
Second
floor
vote.
open for some questions.
Second vote.
Professor.
Second vote.
Now,
second,
one second.
please.
Any
30
questions?
seconds. Be quiet.
Any
Second
questions
vote.
for the-
second
for the
vote.
pupil of
You'll
Shekhar
have to
Gupta
stop
and
this,
Rajdeep
so we'll never
Sardesai?
get to questions. Second vote. How many of you like the education that I have received from these 3 gurus? Or should I change my message? Do you like the education I've received? No? Well, then I'll have to give up my compliments of Indian democracy and go back from 10 out of 10 to 5 out of 10.
No, but seriously, you need to, I mean, you might be a good pupil, but I mean, you need to choose your gurus well. We have a couple of minutes, I think, to throw open the floor for questions for the pupil, if not the gurus. Anyone?
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, you often say that your work is focused on the indexes and not particularly on India. So you've essentially shown the emperor has no clothes and the indexes are not worth the position we're giving them. So how do you see the way out of it? Do you suppose in future we'll have China coming up with a world index of something and Iran with something and that's the future you foresee? Or do you leave it open to young people to solve this problem? What do you see the solution?
You're not going to change the indices. What you have to do is get more data out there. And I would like to see the government of India commission more real, solid survey data so that when we see allegations in the Western media about negative views of Indian democracy, you can turn to hard survey data where people are systematically asked, do you feel that your voice is being heard? Do you feel that you're able to freely select your leaders? If there were hard survey data on India, that would be a fantastic counter-narrative to the subjective evaluations we currently see.
Thank you. On a closing note, just 10 seconds. I think we as Indians, deserve better. We will demand better, critically, and we will not hate our government, we will not hate anyone, but we will always stand up for democratic values, freedom of speech, and we'd like to be as equal as any other citizen of any other country without being patronized to. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Kojo, kojo. Kojo, kojo. Kojo, kojo.